Greetings, friends, and welcome to my channel. I am Alexander Musienko. Today is June 17th, Tuesday, and here is the traditional briefing with the news that I consider relevant, important, and worthy of your esteemed attention. Russia has carried out another terrorist strike on the territory of Ukraine. The attack was a combined one, using both missiles and Shahed type drones. The assault lasted almost the entire night, right up until morning. Kyiv and Odesa, as well as other regions of Ukraine, came under attack. The main, let's say, the primary targets were Kyiv and Odesa. There are now reports of destruction in the Ukrainian capital, with strikes and the collapse of an apartment building entrance. Once again, the enemy used its drones to terrorize and strike, including hitting residential buildings. There were a large number. Right now, the air forces of the armed forces of Ukraine are summing up the results, and there will be corresponding statistics on how many were launched by the enemy and how many were shot down. There were also missiles involved. Again, it should be noted, well, first of all, has the enemy somehow changed their approach? As for the nature of the terrorist strikes, the attacks on our cities, no, it hasn't changed. But regarding how the Shaheds move and their trajectories, indeed, the enemy is changing their approach. First of all, and this is far from the first time, pardon the tautology, but the drones are flying at high altitudes. They come in at an altitude of 4 to 5 kilometers. Some of them are flying exactly along this trajectory. After that, they approach the target and dive down. For those of you who have heard it, I can even explain, perhaps you've heard, that when a drone is flying, it makes the usual sound of a moped, like a buzzing noise. And when it starts to whistle as if it's revving up, that means the drone is about to go in for a direct strike. That is, it increases its speed and dives in order to deliver a strike. In addition, there are also, let's say, cases when the drones simply start to hover, their engines shut off, and they can fall. This happens too. In such cases, they may explode or not explode, just fall, and in fact cause some damage and destruction simply by their weight. In addition, drones circle around trying to deceive our air defense systems, which were operating at the very limits of their capabilities throughout the night, and did everything possible to shoot down as many drones as possible, so that as few of them as possible would reach residential buildings. The trajectories they use to approach the routes are planned in such a way that, regardless of if we take the Ukrainian capital as an example, no matter where they come from, they mostly fly along the designated direction. Even if they come from the left bank, the objective is still on the right bank. They circle around and then accordingly dive toward the target that was predetermined. There are certain peculiarities which are understandable. What I've told you is only a part of the tactics the enemy uses. They constantly try to change their approach to attacks, to replan their routes. Accordingly, when drones are flying in the sky over Ukrainian territory, changes in their routes are also observed. They are not always the same. Obviously, this is done to create certain difficulties for us in countering them. Therefore, this experience is being studied and analyzed. And now our forces are developing methods to more effectively improve and enhance our work in shooting down drones. Because there are difficulties, we have to be on a certain difficulties are being recorded, but in fact the work of air defense continues and will continue. This is what concerns the attack and its practical aspect from the perspective of shooting them down, it's clear that when a drone flies higher, it's more difficult for machine guns and mobile fire teams to engage it because they can't reach such altitudes. Sometimes even anti-aircraft guns, the ZU installations, also can't reach them. Army aviation is also involved Ukrainian helicopters that shoot them down, as well as the Air Force aviation. One of the best ways to shoot down such drones is actually the example of Israel and the countries that help Israel in shooting down Iranian drones launched by Iran. And in fact, it is aviation, it is air-to-air missiles. But for this, obviously, more missiles and more aircraft are needed. And overall, if we had more anti-aircraft missile systems and missiles for them, we could counteract even more effectively. But it's important to understand that the plans of the defense forces do not simply involve passively shooting down drones. Ukraine will also respond to these strikes carried out by Russia and will strike Russian military targets. The war must take place on the enemy's territory, and that is clear. And work in this direction will also be carried out. Meanwhile, there are also foreign policy reasons why Putin carried out yet another terrorist attack. Why is this happening? Because Russia wants to create a certain image right before, in fact, during the G7 summit in Canada, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also traveled. He will be defending Ukraine's national interests and doing everything possible so that despite all the difficulties, agreements are reached no matter what on providing aid packages to Ukraine, on our support from the West, and on the purchase of American weapons. So the president of Ukraine emphasized the day before that we are not currently discussing new aid with America. Indeed, one of the issues that President Trump will discuss at the meeting concerns the defense package that Ukraine is ready to purchase, and we will be talking this over with him. I am confident that we will have such an opportunity, the president of Ukraine noted. And so, against the backdrop of these discussions, Putin is launching attacks, carrying out strikes. The goal, of course, is to demonstrate that Russia supposedly still has capabilities and resources, that Russia has elements of leverage over Ukraine and the West. And the aim of these actions is to try to achieve a result where the reaction of the United States, President Trump, and possibly European countries would be in the direction that perhaps Ukraine needs to accept some unfavorable terms from Russia, because you see, it appears that Putin still has the capability and strength to conduct such active military operations, to carry out strikes, to weaken Ukraine, and therefore there is no other way for official Kyiv except to accept certain conditions from the Kremlin. Putin is also trying to play to Trump, to cater to the American president, who unfortunately, very unfortunately, continues to hope and believe that the Russian dictator is ready to stop this war and ready to end the killings. Trump sincerely regrets that Russia was excluded from the GATE format and that the GATE became the G7. He claims that if Russia hadn't been excluded back then, there wouldn't have been a war. That's quite an interesting logic. Honestly, I don't understand it. I think, just like you, I don't see what this has to do with anything. But that's the kind of logic President Trump has again, and in such situations, especially when the American leader starts saying that sanctions against Russia could harm the US economy and that he's against imposing additional one-ish. She's essentially rejecting the initiatives of Senator Lindsey Graham, who's from his own Republican Party. Graham, together with other members of the Senate from both the Republican and Democratic parties, has developed an excellent bill to introduce 500% tariffs against countries that buy Russian gas, oil, and uranium. So this is being undermined, and Trump says that, well, sanctions could be harmful. How can we not recall once again Agent Krasnov and the version that has been voiced? Because, frankly, it's very hard to logically explain such affection for Putin and his trust in Putin in any other way. But I hope that during the meeting between Ukrainian President Zelensky and Trump, once again the head of the Ukrainian state will use every opportunity to try to change Trump's way of thinking, just as it happened in the Vatican. Back then, the one on one meeting was very successful. And eventually, Trump started writing that, well, maybe Putin might be leading them by the nose. We'll see how it goes this time. But for us, it is fundamentally important in this situation that the United States agrees to provide tens of billions, even hundreds of billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine. How it will be financed is already a matter of financial, economic, and technical details, either through credit guarantees that Ukraine will repay corresponding loans, or with funds from our European partners who are willing to purchase weapons for Ukraine, or instead, as a result of signing an agreement on access to rare earth metals and minerals, or through a combined approach. This needs to be resolved. I believe that the relevant proposals already exist and are on the table. At this point, what matters is a political decision. Meanwhile, on the eve of the official opening of the G7 summit in Canada, there was a lengthy informal conversation among several leaders. The meeting took place between the Prime Minister of Italy, the President of France, the Chancellor of Germany, the Prime Minister of Britain, and the Prime Minister of Canada. The meeting was held at the summit venue and served as an opportunity for an initial discussion on the start of the G7's work. In recent hours, Italian sources have indicated the goal of seeking a coordinated position with European partners regarding the war between Israel and Iran in order to then reach overall coordination with US President Trump. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stated that more pressure needs to be put on Russia to ensure a ceasefire in Ukraine. And before the G7 summit, she called for strengthening sanctions against Russia. Well, I absolutely support the correct call made by the President of the European Commission. But as we can see, there is actually polarization of opinions and positions between the European members of the G7 and also Canada and the United States. Obviously, the leaders did not gather for no reason. On the eve of the summit, they were already discussing and preparing the communiqué, the final statement based on the results of the summit, which is usually prepared in advance. Although this year, I think, will be an exception, judging by everything. And the text of the statement itself will be prepared with amendments almost until the very end of the summit. In other words, this process will last as long as possible because there are many issues on which there are disagreements between Europe, Canada, and Trump's United States of America. And these issues concern both the Russian-Ukrainian war and the current Iran-Israel conflict in the Middle East. You know that the United States has deployed a large number of aerial refueling aircraft, which are meant to refuel American fighter jets in the air. And this was done, according to Pete Hegseth and the US Secretary of Defense, at the request of Central Command, which traditionally oversees the area that includes, among others, the Middle East. Meanwhile, Trump has called for the evacuation of everyone currently in Tehran, hinting that America might enter the war against Iran on the side of Israel, as urged by that country's Prime Minister Netanyahu. At least that's what numerous Western media outlets are reporting, citing their own sources, claiming that such a request has indeed come from Israel. Well, this isn't the first time. Back in the mid 2000s, when Israel was striking Iran's nuclear facilities and other military targets, they were already raising the issue that support from the United States was necessary because completing a military operation without the backing of American aviation, which has the relevant extensive experience, is very difficult. That's why such a calculation exists. Is Trump really preparing to intervene in the war and send his aircraft or perhaps even troops? Despite the fact that Trump's stated position was supposedly that the US would not go to war, we see that the US may actually be preparing for war and has chosen a more comfortable, likely adversary for itself than, for example, Russia. Although it is possible and necessary to fight against Russia, and even on Russian territory, this has been demonstrated by the brilliant special operations of Ukrainian defense forces and intelligence services, which are being carried out on enemy soil. But, well, we see that after all, the preference is to topple the Ayatollah's regime rather than Putin's and to be friends with Putin instead. Well, this is the wrong approach, but right now it's what's on the agenda. So, to wrap up with the G7, there will be heated discussions and debates. We'll see to what extent European politicians will be able to defend the viewpoint of European security and the need to increase pressure against Russia. This, in my opinion, is now a defining moment in terms of advancing the agenda and the situation going forward. Well, and already the president of France, Macron, did not agree with Trump and essentially did not accept the initiative that was proposed by the American president. The president of France, Emmanuel Macron, rejected the idea of US President Trump regarding the participation of Russia's war criminal Putin in mediation efforts between Israel and Iran. Here is what Macron said. I do not believe that Russia, which is participating in the war against Ukraine in a high intensity conflict and has chosen not to respect the UN Charter for several years, can be a mediator. Absolutely right. I would also add that Russia cannot be a mediator because all of Russia's initiatives and its entire Middle Eastern policy have ended in failure and fiasco. All so-called peacekeeping and mediation efforts have come to nothing. Let's recall Russia's mediation in the negotiations during the Syrian war, how they organized the Astana format and held meetings in Russia. And it all led to nothing. They took Assad's side, who lost, and now, in fact, the issue, well, I think the matter of Russian bases there would have been resolved long ago. Russia would have been kicked out of Syria if perhaps the United States had taken a different stance. Because right now the current authorities in Damascus are heavily influenced by Turkey and the United States, with whom the new Syrian government has established contacts. And Russia clearly has no place there with its bases in Tartus and Khmeimim. But obviously for now it is only the position of the United States that is keeping the Syrian authorities from making decisions. Otherwise Russia would have already been thrown out of there. The next point is that Russia acted as a mediator between Israel and Hamas and did so completely unsuccessfully. And this did not lead to the end of the war. So, what kind of mediator is Russia? This is just an attempt, basically, well, an attempt to drag, let's say, to drag Russia in here and to try to assign it some kind of role in international politics, which is absolutely unjustified. From my point of view, meanwhile, the Kremlin keeps coming up with new conditions for ending the war. Now, a certain deputy foreign minister of Russia, Alexander Grushko, has come out and, in a comment to the publication Izvestia, stated that Ukraine must destroy, burn Western weapons. So, like on the fires of the Inquisition, How exactly is Ukraine supposed to burn Western weapons? Well, Ukraine supposedly should, and the armaments must be disposed of, reduced. And so Grushko said that the black markets are overflowing with weapons and so on and so forth. Well, these are absolutely unacceptable demands. Once again, it's an attempt to, so to speak, cast a line and say that Russia continues to insist on demilitarization. But these conditions are unacceptable, and of course, Ukraine will not accept them. Meanwhile, Zakharovata, press drunk, as she's called, right? Yes, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is very concerned that the US has canceled another round of negotiations with Russia regarding, um, let's say, deepening and establishing diplomatic relations. Such rounds of negotiations had been ongoing earlier this year. They took place both in Istanbul, Turkey, and in Saudi Arabia. And indeed, at that time, the United States very quickly agreed to the appointment of the Russian ambassador to the United States accordingly. But, well, now these negotiations have been postponed. The reasons are unknown, but in Russia, they blame it on the position of the United States. And Putin's spokesperson Uzi Peskov noted that no exact date has been set yet for a possible round of negotiations with the Ukrainian delegation regarding ending the war. Well, it's clear that no date has been set because what is there to talk about when Putin continues his terrorist strikes, which do not stop? Meanwhile, the European Union is postponing its plans to phase out Russian nuclear fuel. Already this week, the European Union will present a plan for a complete phase out of all fossil fuels from Russia. However, the plans to abandon Russian nuclear energy are being postponed. This was reported by the Financial Times. In 2024, the countries of the European Union paid Russia 22 billion euros. Just think about it, 22 billion. With those 22 billion, they enriched the Russian Putin war economy, which Russia uses to terrorize Europe. In other words, Europe is financing Putin's war against itself. Out of those 22 billion euros, 700 million went for nuclear fuel. However, experts have determined that it is particularly difficult to get rid of this dependency because an abrupt halt in supplies would supposedly create a huge risk for the EU's energy security. From a technical standpoint, the uranium supply chain is complex, so a gradual phase out is necessary. Currently, there are 101 nuclear reactors operating in the EU, and 19 of them are of Soviet design. Russian spare parts are purchased for these reactors. In addition, approximately 20 to 25% of the units depend on Russia for the supply of natural, converted, and enriched uranium. And now imagine if Lindsey Graham's sanctions introducing 500% tariffs against those countries that buy Russian oil, gas, and uranium in particular were to take effect. I think the consequences would be colossal, and it would force countries to look for alternative ways to avoid using uranium from Russia and other types of fossil fuels from the aggressor state. The gradual rejection of Russian imports is in line with the measures taken by other Western countries. In April 2023, the G7 countries agreed to develop nuclear capacities in order to stop using Russian fuel. Well, for example, there are some positive developments here because Canada has already banned all imports of uranium from Russia, and the United Kingdom has imposed a 35% tariff on Russian enriched uranium. The United States has passed a law to stop importing Russian uranium starting in 2028. However, overall, Russia's dominance in this sector creates rather serious quite serious risks. That is a fact. Therefore, there is still hope that the European community will eventually come to its senses and, well, will take action against this. Ukraine is calling for this, and it is necessary to get off the Russian needle, not only in terms of oil and gas, but also uranium, and to stop financing the aggressor. Because every sum, every euro, every dollar that goes into the Russian economy is, well, a dollar stained with human blood, suffering, and the destruction of innocent civilians. It is unacceptable to sponsor the terrorist regime of Russia. Ultimately, this needs to be understood. Meanwhile, China has quieted down somewhat, but at the same time continues to go about its business quietly yet confidently. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, China is increasing its nuclear arsenal faster than any other country in the world. In 1 year, 100 warheads have been added. China is expanding its nuclear arsenal faster than any other country. In 2025, China possesses 600 nuclear warheads. This is 100 units more compared to 2024. According to SIPRI, the country's nuclear arsenal has been growing at this pace since 2023. As of January 2025, China has completed or nearly completed the construction of about 350 new silos for intercontinental ballistic missiles in 3 large desert regions in the north of the country and 3 mountainous regions in the east. Experts note that depending on how China decides to structure its armed forces by the end of the decade, it could potentially have at least as many ballistic missiles as Russia or the United States. Currently, China ranks third in the world in terms of its stockpile of nuclear warheads. In fact, China is actively building up and militarizing its navy. They have truly challenged even the United States in terms of naval power and are trying to modernize their ground forces as well. This branch of the military is the most underdeveloped in the People's Republic of China, and now they are working on their nuclear capabilities as well, quietly, very quietly, but they are modernizing and preparing for a possible major war. But as for China, it's clear that for now, the main irritant to European and international security is Putin, is Russia. And the main threat to global security is Putin and Russia, who must be stopped. And only then can we talk about containing China and so on. Friends, I urge you to take care of yourselves and, despite everything, to look and move forward with confidence and with God's help. Let's hold the line and keep chipping away at the rock, just as Ivan Yakovich Franco taught us. Subscribe to the channel, leave your comments, like and share this video so that our community continues to grow and expand, much to the dismay of all those Russian bots, and so that we move closer to victory. Take care of yourselves, and glory to Ukraine.